Ever wonder what the results would be if you ditched your gym membership and went back to the fundamental bodyweight movements? I documented an entire year of high rep, high frequency trainings, and the results shocked me. As the name suggests, high rep, high frequency training involves performing exercises within close proximity to muscle failure on a frequent basis. This is quite contrary to conventional training that generally suggests that 8 to 12 repetitions is optimal for muscle growth. So at this point, you're probably wondering why anyone would take the high rep, high frequency training approach. One driving factor is that recent evidence suggests that it is proximity to failure, or in other words, the point that you can no longer perform the movement with correct technique that drives muscle growth. This in itself makes high rep, high frequency training an appropriate method for both strength and conditioning as well as hypertrophy. Last year, after resonating with K.Boges' approach to training, I made a video on my experience trialing the method for a week. I mentioned in the video that while I could definitely see the utility to training in this style, the main limitation was that I really didn't trial the method for long enough to say whether it is an effective long-term approach to training. This video addresses that limitation, as I have now been using Boges' principles and methodologies to training for over a year and feel much more qualified to express my findings around both the benefits and limitations to the high rep, high frequency approach to training. Put simply, Boges' approach to training focuses on mastering the fundamentals and performing movements with correct form and technique, while applying training principles such as intensity, frequency, specificity, and progressive overload to ensure you are not plateauing in your fitness journey. Boges definitely came onto the scene at the right time, where people were looking for options outside of the gym due to lockdowns, or in my case, looking for more efficient ways to train to save time. It's easy to see why he gained popularity. His videos are short and to the point. His approach is easy to follow and very beginner friendly. And clearly, the guy practices what he preaches. But is it really an effective approach to training? Or are you better off running back to your gym, picking up some heavy shit, and putting it down again? One of the massive pros to adopting a high rep, high frequency style of training is that it is very easy to implement. You already have most, if not all of the tools at your disposal. You can get creative by using a low branch for pull-ups, or a couple of chairs for dips, and bricks for some makeshift parallettes. I do recommend investing in some good quality equipment further into your journey, but because the barrier of entry is already so low, I suggest that you get started first and then worry about the equipment later. If we revisit my earlier videos, my training style was essentially hybrid, meaning a combination of both conventional lifting and calisthenics, with a heavy focus on variety. It is arguable that my variety in exercise selection was almost excessive, but this was a personal decision, as I found a lot of benefits in training in many different movement patterns, and it allowed me to train injury-free for a long time. The issue was that when I began to record my workouts, I quickly realized that my basics were nowhere near where I thought they were in terms of form and repetition quality. When I began to think about it, I really hadn't put any effort into mastering the basics. Because to me, coming from a sport background, where you are constantly focusing on complex skill-based learning, the push-up almost seemed too trivial for me to need to focus on form. Turns out, this is not the case. And if you truly think you've mastered the basics, then I challenge you to record a few repetitions. And I can almost guarantee that unless you've been extremely intentional and mindful about your training, you'll pick up on at least a few areas that you can work toward correcting. Going back to the basics and fundamentals not only helped me with my calisthenics journey, it also translated over to me becoming more intentional about my other practices. Implementing Boges' practices coincided with the time that I started my Muay Thai journey. For anyone that trains martial arts, you know how important conditioning is, and how many hundreds of repetitions you perform in a single session. Training in a high rep, high frequency fashion prior me to be more adapted to the endurance-based Muay Thai sessions. My focus on form also allowed me to stay injury-free and extremely consistent, which has been game changing in terms of fast tracking progress, allowing me to live my best life and improve my overall physical and mental well-being in general. The only time this training method became a bit of a hindrance was during my time in Thailand. Training Muay Thai for nearly 4 hours per day, 6 times a week, meant that my endurance energy system was beyond taxed by the end of the day. In hindsight, any efforts outside of the Muay Thai sessions would have probably been better spent performing some explosive power and plyometric based workouts, or just cutting my losses and putting my calisthenics workouts on hold, seeing as my training needs were more than adequately met from the Muay Thai sessions anyway. For those of you that have watched this far, I'm about to drop hands down the biggest benefit I found from adopting a high rep, high frequency calisthenics training style. Consistency. 2 months in Thailand, followed by 2 months in Nepal, and a 2-month work trip around Australia meant that I spent more of the year away than home. Previously, this would have impacted my training schedule massively, but armed with the knowledge that high rep, high frequency calisthenics training is an appropriate approach for muscle growth and conditioning.
Daily full body training is a great way to organize your calisthenics training for a few reasons. It can lower your perceived time investment because your workouts are shorter.
I was motivated to keep my trainings going throughout this time and document the results. In other words, I was consistent. I showed up day in, day out, even when I had every excuse not to. I realized that most people who aren't getting what they want out of their training are generally lacking in one thing. And no, it's not a secret tip or trick that you are scouring the internet and watching thousands of hours of podcasts for. It's consistency. Habits are powerful, and leveraging them fast tracks results and stops the pattern of yo-yoing, where you make a good amount of progress and are consistent for a short period of time, only to undo all of this hard work by taking long periods of hiatus from training. Consistency truly is more important than being genetically blessed or smart. A great example of this can be seen in my YouTube channel. When I was posting consistently, I built good momentum and went from 0 to 600 subscribers in a span of roughly 3 months. But unfortunately, I fell off and stagnated, barely posting for the rest of the year. What happened next is hardly surprising, but it's still well worth highlighting. My channel quickly stagnated and slowly began to die. The reason I tell this story is because the same is true across all areas of life. The journey never stops, and no matter what approach you take to training, the most important ingredient isn't necessarily what you do, but how often you do it and how long for. Put simply, consistency drives results, and results compound over time. In summary, high rep, high frequency calisthenic training is a practical and effective approach to fitness. I'm by no means trying to put conventional training down and calisthenics on a pedestal. Of course, both training methods have their limitations and strengths. I advocate training all energy systems, and heavy compound lifts are hands down one of the best ways to train for strength. The important thing to remember is that approaches to training are just a small piece of the puzzle. The reason I continued to make progress, improve my body composition, and have hands down one of the best years of my life was far more to do with consistency over time and applying the principle of progressive overload to continue to challenge myself and grow. And of course, as always, drop any comments, questions, or abuse down below.